So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Good Governance Show. So West Yorkshire Pension Fund is one of the largest funds within the LGPS, has many strengths, including a great internal investment team, and is certainly a low-cost provider of pensions in comparison to other funds. However, achieving best practice in governance is a moving feast, and keeping up with that is a constant challenge. This presentation attempts to highlight some of the current issues and will hopefully illustrate some of the challenges. So, keeping up with good governance is effectively a rolling programme, so some of this might look familiar to you, particularly those of you who saw this presentation or equivalent presentation last year. So we'll cover a reminder of why good governance is important, a review of the to-do list from last year to see what has actually been achieved through the course of the current year, and what's currently happening and what's coming next. So who cares? And the answer is we all should. We require good governance from the companies that we invest in and the other managers that we deal with, and the fund's employers and members also need this reassurance. We have a wider audience, however, and here is a list of the main regulatory bodies, government departments, and other regulators. There's a wider group, of course, including the press, pressure groups. The list goes on and on. And the important thing, so far as the fund is concerned, is that we should always be ready for a snap inspection in the same way that the FCA would arrive at a regulated firm without any notice, and to be able to demonstrate good practice and procedures. So, keeping up with good governance, what's involved in that? Well, a reminder that governance is the G of ESG. There's a whole raft of regulations that bear down upon us. And actually, this is sort of, again, a moving feast. And I commend you to look at the SAB, the Scheme Advisory Board website that has a very good news page on the front end of it. And it's certainly a go-to, so far as I'm concerned, whenever I need to sort of make sure that I'm not missing anything on the way through, which of course is something which is actually quite easy to do. This list is far from exhaustive and could include other issues which have already been referred to, which might include McLeod and GMP rectification. So looking at the fund itself, we have a full governance structure in terms of the bodies involved in the management of the fund and the publications, the strategy statements that we have. And again, I can point you there to those websites that you can refer to for that information. It's not meant to be an eye test here, so that is really a source of reference for when you see the slides later on. And it does provide, as I say, that overview of the governance structure. From last year, this is what we laid out as the next steps. A full governance review to address the challenge of an appropriate remuneration policy to recruit and retain, most importantly, the excellent staff that West Yorkshire Pension Funds currently have. A lot of the work in progress did revolve around ESG and particularly compliance with the UK Stewardship Code. We're well aware of the fact that there's a cost involved in this, both in time, money, effort, but is vitally important so that we do continue to follow best practice. Okay, so a year on and the scores are in. The outstanding 10 certainly goes for being accepted as a signatory to the UK Stewardship Code. I'll come back to this, but I should stress that this makes us one of only 17 funds so far within the LGPS, and that's 101 funds that have achieved this status so far. On training, a modular training program has been introduced, which is available for members, and this will be further developed as the year progresses. Sadly, the governance review has not taken place, and there has no explanation effectively for that, even though this has been flagged to the administering authority. I would say at this stage, however, is that we'll be having a look again at the Scheme Advisory Board Good Governance Review, and early next year there will be a consultation process which will take that process further forward. So at this stage, given that that is in the pipeline as such, it will be sensible to make sure that while we take on board, and we'll go through that a little bit later, what comes through from that, that actually a lot of that is not yet cast in stone. Really good news is that a new managing director has been appointed, but the serious issues revolving around further recruitment and retention remain to be addressed. But the message is out there, it's loud and clear. The administering authority now fully understand the importance of this, and I'm pleased again to be able to report that progress will hopefully be made in the near future in this respect. So, looking at the Scheme Advisory Board Good Governance Review, I mean, this is a really good example of the continuing pressure of changing governance standards. It does seek to address the inevitable potential and actual conflict between LGPS funds and their administering authorities. This is particularly true for former metropolitan funds, of which West Yorkshire Pension Fund is one, where the administering authority is actually often only a minority stakeholder. It's a step further down the road towards a private sector model, and where the pension fund is effectively ring-fenced from the sponsor, in this case, the administering authority. So in general, this will lay out the groundwork for how the proposals will be implemented. It will address those aspects of conflict of interest. Representation of scheme members is a key point, actually, with the whole background to the management of the LGPS, and that will be reviewed as part of this. I referred to training earlier, and there is a requirement within the Good Governance Review for knowledge and understanding to be brought up to the same level that is actually applied already to members of the local pension board. So effectively, all key individuals, officers and committee members will have to demonstrate that they have the appropriate level of knowledge and understanding to fulfil their duties. This is something that the fund is already addressing and will be developed further. So service delivery for the LGPS function, which is effectively responsibility of Bradford Council. What is important to stress is that as we move forward, the committee, which in this case forms effectively the IAP and the JAG Joint Advisory Group, and the senior officer responsible for the fund, which in this case will be the managing director, must be satisfied with the resource and budget allocated to deliver the service on an ongoing basis. So this is effectively going to bring a lot more of the responsibility for the fund to the fund, effectively. And then compliance and improvement, this is something, again, which will work forward with the proposals being put forward and has yet to be developed as such. Moving on, it would be remiss of me to not actually spend a moment again looking at the climate risk and how it relates to good governance. I'm delighted to say, as I mentioned earlier, that we have achieved the UK Stewardship Code status. That has involved a huge amount of work. I know for a fact that this is a tortuous process. I proofread another fund's submission for this, and there's an awful lot of work goes into it. So full credit to the fund's officers, and in particular to Robert Hume. Now, looking at sort of the various elements of climate risk, the fund has long been involved in climate risk issues along with the broader ESG. But certainly climate change at the moment is the biggest issue at the moment. But it is important that we should continue to make sure that we keep the balance right. Marianne's already referred to the fact that we have produced our first annual report in line with the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure Recommendations, and that is something which is likely to be encapsulated in regulations going forward. And we do need to undertake the continuing work to remain as a signatory to the UK Stewardship Code. One of the challenges revolving around climate risk is actually effective measurement, and it can be quite a challenge to prove, and the methods of so doing is a developing area. So it is to effectively provide evidence that climate change initiatives are effective. The Stewardship Code requires an annual return, which we've referred to, and that includes a requirement to actually show evidence of outcomes from the work that has been initiated with our managers, both internally and externally. So, moving on. And one of the biggest of the issues that you'll probably read about in the press and elsewhere is the divestment issue. Clearly, the fund is invested in fossil fuels at the current time, but we do engage in a policy of engagement with those companies to effectively encourage them and to ensure that they actually form part of the transition to more sustainable energy production, such as wind and solar. And it is fair to say that a number of the major companies that are involved, such as BP and Shell, do invest considerably in alternative power production. And I think it is important to stress that if you actually divest from a company, you effectively lose the right to have a say in what that company does. So we work with other investors as well, because as a lone voice, we might not get very far. So we work with our colleagues across Northern Pool, our colleagues across the LGPS, and through the LATFI organisation, which the fund has a long history of very close involvement with that. Looking now at what's in the pipeline, and this is what we already know is sort of effectively coming, the Department for Housing, Levelling Up and Communities has launched their consultation on climate change risk already. That relates to TCFD. Responses are due in for that by the 24th of November. That does provide the fund with the opportunity to comment on the proposals and to raise any potential issues around implementation. And I just cite as an example, it's proposed to have a scheme-wide climate risk report, which may seek to compare funds against each other. Now, that sounds great in theory, but actually when you put that into practice, given that every fund has a different asset allocation and exposures to basically climate issues, this is a real case of how you actually try to come up with a process where you can compare funds effectively against each other. Also likely coming up is a bill to place limits on LGPS's funds' ability to carry out boycotts, divestment and sanctions. This is quite an involved issue, which at this stage is still very much subject to consultation. And therefore, the actual details of what is going on here have remain to be resolved and made clear. So this is definitely a case of needing to watch this space. So what's coming down the track over the course of the forthcoming period? The civil servants at the department have indicated that they will be undertaking a further consultation this autumn. Now that might roll on into winter because they do have a bit of a track record, and excuse the pun, for things moving to the right. But from what I understand, it will cover a number of issues that have been, in a sense, outstanding over the last few years. That includes some tying up of matters outstanding from the Competition Markets Authority review back in 2018. That was primarily to do with fiduciary management and the role of investment consultants. Progress or otherwise with pooling, which is effectively aimed at accelerating the pooling of fund assets. But we'll need to be careful to make sure that we look at the detail of that. Levelling up has been talked about a lot, and this is intended that we'll get some more detail around exactly what the definitions are about this. And fair deal, which is basically around strengthening pension protection. There will be a separate consultation, which I've referred to, on good governance, looking at the good governance review from the SAB, and that will follow on early in 2023. So the benefits of good governance, they're really clear there for you to see, but effectively this is a rising tide all of the time. Regulators are taking much more interest in pension funds, but specifically those within the LGPS. Good companies have good governance, so should we. And some of those other issues there are actually just revolve around making sure that we have a governance structure which is fit for purpose and will serve the fund and its members into the future. And with that, we'll hand over to Andrew and questions.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Philip. Not sure if we've got questions ready that have been submitted already.
There were no submitted questions, Councillor.
Okay. Are we doing the questions then from the chat?
There's been nothing further on from the question that's been answered.
Okay. With that in mind then, if there isn't anyone else asking anything, I would just say thank you all very much for your attendance this afternoon. And if you're watching it back, then whatever time of day that happens to be. But thank you all very much for your interest in attending. And if there's nothing further, we'll say close the meeting.